This is the code for the kiosk project, and it's a little on the complicated side, but it's only set up that way because it's actually set up so that it's easier for you to use. And I'll give you a tour of how things are set up. Okay, if I run this, it's set up so that the buttons in here, these are actually movie clips with buttons inside them. The buttons, and I'll refer to them as buttons, but they're set up so that they rename themselves, or actually they get renamed. And it starts off at position 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 because we're setting everything up with an array. And if we go back in here, we can see in here that this is button 0, 1, and all the way through 4. These little dots are what you would move over to the location where you want to navigate to. And the way they're set up is they take the first name, button number 4, would be linked to this one over here, button number 4. But the code is set up so that if you click on button number 4, it takes the name that you've clicked on and it adds the dot extension, if you will, to it. And that way it knows that it's linked to this movie clip over here. This movie clip is an animation. If we double click on it, we can see the animation. This is just a simple stop that's going on the first frame, and on the second frame is where it gets bigger, and then it just fades away. So there's only a stop here in this location, and this location here as well. And that's it. It's a fairly easy animation. Whatever you want the animation to do, just set it up so that it does where it's supposed to go, and then how you want it to fade away at the back end with no JavaScript code here on the end. Okay, so the other thing that's set up are these buttons over here. And if we go in here, you can see that there are 2 frames in here. There's whenever you click on it, it'll automatically switch over to the second frame, and a little black bullet here shows up to let you know what frame you're on. So this is the way it normally looks, but when you roll over to the second frame, it lets you know that you've isolated. So here's how it works. So if I click on on location 0, it animates and it goes to that spot. If I go to 4, it repositions itself. So it's just navigating in relationship to what it's going to point to. The nice thing about this is that I can come back over here. Here I'm on the main stage. Is I can move these around to different locations, and they reorient themselves. So I can put these, anywhere I want, and then when I click on these, they'll always find that dot location because it's looking for the dot in that position. So you're not limited to put these in a particular order on the stage. It just automatically goes to that location. So let me get these back to where the original state was, or at least close to that. I think that's where it was. Okay, so let's test that, make sure I'm in the right spot, just make sure everything works okay. Okay, now the other thing that you can do with this is you can change the orientation of the arrow. I'm back on the main stage, and over here there's an arrow layer. The arrow has to be on top, that way it floats on top of everything, and all your other map information can go in layer 1. But the arrow in here is oriented to these crosshairs. So if I take the crosshairs, let me click on the crosshairs, and I'm going to move them up to the top left-hand corner, and I run this. Now instead of being a 45-degree pointing around 230, it's going to be pointing down closer to 730 on a clock. So now if I click on 0, this flips all the way around, and this orientates accordingly. Same thing would happen if I move the crosshairs over here. It would go point down this way, and from down here it will point up this way. Well, it can also be centered in the artwork, and this will essentially keep the orientation of the arrow pointing from the center. That way, if you've got something really close to the edge or really close to the bottom, you don't have to worry about losing your arrow because it always stays on the inside of the map. So let's see what that looks like. So let's see, so that's 0, 1, 2, so that should be location number 2, and it points to that spot. And if I go to 0, you'll see that it's staying within the boundaries of the map. And as long as it's within that breaking point, the center point, the arrow will stay at a 45-degree angle. It's also set up so that you can rotate from one position to another, and it does an even rotation. Now, this is probably telling you more than you need to know, but because we're working in 360 degrees, if I'm moving from a negative 45 to a 45-degree angle of the arrow, and what ends up happening is that when I come over here to a 270 or whatever the orientation was of the degree over here, and I go to a negative 45, it actually goes from a 270 to a negative 45 degree, which is not what we want. We want the rotation always to be smooth, so it looks like it's just moving around. So the code's actually set up to do that. If you want to change the angles, you can ask me about it in class. I really don't think it's necessary. The reason why I wanted to keep the angle the same is mostly for design reasons, so it looks consistent. Otherwise, I didn't want the arrow to rotate and always point at from a different direction. And that would imply an orientation of something like the center was important, but it really isn't. It's just so that the arrow will fit within what it's selecting. So if you want to add more links to it, it's relatively easy. You you have to do a couple of things. First, we need to make a copy of this, and we need to change that name from button number 4 to button number 5. Then we need a corresponding place that it's going to link. It doesn't matter which one of these you select to make a copy of it. I'll just grab this one, hold the Option key down and move it over. And then this also gets the same orientation as button number 5. But then, in order for it to work, I have to add it to my list, to my array. So if I come back over here to where the code is, here's my list. And so over here you can see that this top list over here ends with button number 4. This is actually identifying the button that you click on. So I'm going to copy that and paste it again, and maybe fix my comma over here. And I'm just going to change this number to button number 5. And over here, where it's actually taking the name of the text, I'll copy that, I'll paste it and paste it. I'll change that to 5. And everything looks good there. So now I've got in my array list, I've got 5, which is actually 6, but I've got button number 5 now in place, and location 5. Remember, they start at 0. So you would leave these button names the same. But if you want to have the name change over here, you could change this to pretty much anything you want. So for example, let's go with this one, and we'll just call this Art D. And if I run this, you'll notice that now position 0 in here says Art Department. And this will still point to that location. Button number 5 was created with the name, which was, I think, this one. And so, nope, it was this one. So that's going to position number 5. And they all work the way they're supposed to. And it's pretty straightforward. The only downside to this interface, if you want to have the arrow working, is that there's no way to point to multiple structures. So in one of our examples in the art department, we have art history pointing to 2 different rooms, and drawing and painting does it as well. And in our particular case, we're only going to be locating single locations. So for example, if you've got one button that selects all the parking structures, you're obviously not going to be able to have the arrow point to all the structures at the same time. Also, because the way the code is set up, it's only set up so that it animates one location at a time as well. If you want to make the option so that you can see multiple selections at the same time, that's going to take some modification on the code. So the easiest thing to do is, if you've got something like multiple parking structures, the easiest thing to do is make sure that you have a separate link for each one of the parking structures. If you have different locations and you want to reference those locations, then you could say something like Art History Classroom 1, Art History Classroom 2, and then you can click on that and it'll go to that location. Or you could even be specific and type in the room number, something that's more specific to the location than just kind of a generic term of where all the parking structures are. If that doesn't work for you, then you can still use the original code that we were using as a foundation to get to this final code. You won't get the benefit of having the arrow, and honestly, it's not really that necessary. It just makes it a little bit more visually appealing when you see this navigating. Okay, so in the next movie that I make, that'll be part of this series, I'll show you how to take an existing map and apply this code to it. And essentially, it's just a copy and paste job. And once you've got everything set up, for the most part, you're okay. All right, so we'll catch you in the next movie.